Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. Well, in our journey through history, let's travel back to the southeastern United States and back about 150 years to the 1860s when the nation was divided in the brutal Civil War. Let's discover one of the most important campaigns that took place during the war, and it was a legendary one in the annals of warfare. It ultimately broke the back of the Confederacy and encapsulated what Union General William Tecumseh Sherman perfected as the art of total war. In the hot summer months of 1864, Sherman's Union forces bombarded the city of Atlanta and utterly decimated it before making their way to the Atlantic Ocean. This contributed heavily to the final Union victory in the war, and it would become known as Sherman's March to the Sea. Well, the march began with the siege of Atlanta in July of 1864. The Union forces under General Sherman relentlessly pounded the Confederate city with mortar rounds and artillery. Now, Atlanta was one of the most important and strategic outposts the rebels held. It was in many ways a lesser capital city for the Confederacy after the city of Richmond, one of the most vital for the rebels in the Deep South. Now, the rebels survived for nearly 2 months until early September of 1864, when Confederate General John Hood yanked his troops out of the city, destroying everything they could that would have been considered of value to the invading Union. It did not much matter in the end, as Sherman and his men demolished the city anyway. Now, Sherman, as we mentioned earlier, was an expert in the art of total war, and that's basically a strategy of warfare based on pummeling the enemy's resolve by destroying their resources and cutting off any hope of survival. Sherman, who wanted to punish the South for its treason, was not satisfied in mere victory. He wanted the South to bleed. So he and his men began their famed March to the Sea in November of 1864, where they sought out natural and man-made resources that could have been useful for a Confederate resurgence and utterly destroyed them. They made the 300-mile trek east from Atlanta to the coastal town of Savannah, burning forests and crops and pulling up railway lines. In fact, at Sherman's command, soldiers would often melt the railroads and wrap them around trees, and these railroad-wrapped tree trunks would become known as Uncle Billy's neckties. Well, this campaign made Sherman a complete villain in the South, but a great hero in the North, and second only perhaps to his commander, U.S. Grant, the top Union general during the course of the war. Sources indicate that Sherman's army destroyed over $100 million worth of goods in their march to the sea. Of course, the march would not be complete without a Union takeover of another important Confederate city. And sure enough, Sherman's forces took Savannah on December 22nd, and he famously then sent a message to President Abraham Lincoln shortly thereafter, presenting his Christmas present to the commander-in-chief, the city of Savannah. And less than 4 months later, the Confederates would formally surrender, giving the Union victory in the Civil War. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.